Hey everyone, welcome to the GuildChat Café brought to you by the Learning Guild. My name is Jeff Batt, and today we're going to be talking with Debbie Richards, who is the president of Creative Interactive Ideas. Welcome, Debbie.
Welcome to you, Jeff, and to everybody listening.
Thank you. So, Debbie, let's go ahead and give you a quick introduction. Just if you want to tell us a little bit about you and also why you're passionate about learning as well.
Certainly. Um, I'm based in Houston, Texas. I have been a lifelong learner, love learning about new things. I'm the first one to try out new technology. When I hear about it, like if Jeff sees something and he's talking about it, I race out to take a look at it. And I absolutely I love it. And I also just wanted to give a shout out and say how much I appreciate the Learning Guild, especially the fact that there are wonderful research reports and things for me to look at that help enhance my learning. I've learned a lot through the reports, especially the ones by Jane Bozart, and also by attending all the conferences. I think you can never get enough of new information, and don't ever think that you know it all because there's always something new coming around the corner.
Awesome. Thanks, Debbie. And if you want access to those reports, I didn't set up Debbie that way, but if you want access to those reports, you can become a free member at learningguild.com as well. Now, Debbie, let's get into the topic here. I know you're going to be talking about learning at Learning Solutions 2022 coming up on April 20th through the 22nd. You're going to be talking about prepping your company for an immersive learning program. So that leads us into our first question, just so we kind of level set here. What is immersive learning? What are you talking about when you're talking about immersive learning?
So when we talk about immersive learning, many times we're talking about augmented reality and virtual reality. But they are basically any kind of immersive technologies that will allow users to experience um, digitally rendered content either in a physical in a virtual space. And the big thing about immersive learning is you can share information in new and engaging ways and in ways that don't impact and help you mitigate barriers that may come across because of cost or distance in learning.
Awesome. So you're talking about virtual reality, augmented reality, kind of mixed reality as well. It's kind of all of these combined, right?
Correct.
Awesome. Now, that leads me to my next question, though, is if somebody's wanting to explore immersive learning or get into it, how do they start developing for how do they start developing for immersive learning?
Yeah, so I think if you're bringing immersive learning into your organization, and that's what I'm going to be talking about at Learning Solutions, is how can you make the case for immersive learning? First of all, you need to understand and be able to demonstrate what augmented reality and virtual reality are. Um, so you can showcase things that are already existing. There's lots of good examples for both sides. You don't have to invest a whole lot of money in technology in order to demonstrate that. But I think in both cases, people won't understand what you're talking about until they see a demo. So you need to have that demo. And I'll talk about how to do that demo, some examples that you can use, and some things that might be appropriate for you to use as well. You've got to have that aha moment for everybody so they understand. And you need to make sure that you identify a real world case that you can solve if you're going to pilot or bring immersive learning into your environment. I just watched a really neat webinar that Kevin Lang gave, and I want to give a shout out to him. This was something that was out on the Learning Guild site. And I'm just going to share a couple of things that he said. Um, he said, when you're thinking about using an immersive learning solution, you need to think about whether or not you're using that technology to fill a hole in your current learning solution, or are you just modifying your learning solution to use that technology? And if you're doing that, why are you doing that? Does it make the learning better? Or just provide an aha moment or how you're going to do it. And then finally, does the cost and time invested in it justify the outcome? So um, you need to be prepared because in what happens is somebody from your safety department or another department will go to a conference and they'll see immersive learning and they'll come back and say, we need to do this. So you yourself need to know what the technology is, how it works, so you can answer questions and be able to have good responses for folks who want to implement immersive learning because it's going to come from outside of L&D.
Yeah, that's great. So I'm hearing two things is first of all, know the why you're doing it, and then also come up with like a proof of concept, which I found valuable whenever you're exploring any new type of technology is, show them what can happen or how it can benefit and other stuff. But I think it goes back to what you're saying is start with that why. Why, where will it benefit the company and so forth. So definitely agree there. Now, I do that it leads me to I've explored with augmented reality. I've explored things with virtual reality as well. In what cases does AR make sense, and then in what cases does VR make sense? Because it kind of seems like they're two different, even though they're similar, they're also two different use cases there.
Yeah, so I recommend using augmented reality when you're trying to augment some learning. So use it for performance support to start with. If you're trying to think about um, providing some just-in-time resources for learners, you could use augmented reality to do that. I've also used it to engage learners in a hybrid environment. So, for example, a few years ago, I showed how you could use augmented reality to do a digital um, I'm trying to think of what we call it, escape room. So we put people in a situation and they had to go around and look for things and then have a discussion. And they used augmented reality to either watch a video or find things that were provided for them. So you can use it in any number of different ways. Now, for virtual reality is about the closest thing that you'll get to an immersive environment. So you're putting people in a situation where they can practice and they can also reskill. So, for example, I'm currently working on a project where we're going to have folks that have been trained on a certain task in a manufacturing environment be able to fill in for somebody if somebody else on that assembly line is out for the day and everybody has learned the skill but this person may only do one part of that skill. They could use the virtual environment to train on another part of that line assembly and quickly come up to speed to be able to perform that task. And it also allows you to make mistakes that you couldn't normally make in a real world. So, for example, putting out a fire, knowing which fire extinguisher to pick. If you pick the wrong fire extinguisher in real life, there could be some severe consequences. But in a virtual environment, that's just a simulation. You can go back and learn from your mistakes and pick the right fire extinguisher.
Yeah, so it allows you, it's kind of a safe space to explore virtual
Correct.
reality, and then augmented reality, from what I'm hearing, is like you're saying, performance support. You're in the person's window or the real world, and then you can add additional layers on top of that. So awesome. Now, what when you're thinking about it in the instructional design world, so let's say I'm an instructional designer and I'm used to designing for courses inside of Storyline and Captivate and such. How do I have to start thinking differently when I'm thinking about augmented reality and designing for virtual reality and those types of experiences?
So I start with the basics whenever I'm designing. I start with the same thing that I normally do. I have an outline, I have a goal, I do a flow chart with my learning objectives, and then, you map out the steps the learner is going to take, just like you would with any other type of simulation. But the big difference is what happens after that step is, the kind of assets that you're going to have to create. So for these types of interactions, you may also include some things that you don't normally include, like 3D modeling, video elements, other things. Of course, all these things have to line up with their learning goals. And then you may also have to write custom scripts that will make the content playable through authoring tools, and also developing scripts for the interactions. So there are some things that happen after the initial design that are slightly different from when you develop um, for developing in storyline or something else. You're going to that next level in that interaction.
Okay. So how does one get started? Like, okay, so the design part might be very similar, but actual development and creating those assets, how does one get started um, developing that or exploring that, and what tools and stuff to use? What's some recommendations on that?
So there's two things. First of all, you've got to determine whether or not you're going to do this training yourself. So if you have decided that this is something that your organization needs and the type of activity or interaction that you're going to do is fairly complex, then you may want to just be involved in that design process, and especially for a pilot, and let an agency handle the development component of it. What that does is it lets you concentrate on the content and the deliverables, but you don't have to get caught up in learning a new technology, learning how to do 3D modeling, learning new software. And there are some programs that you can ramp up and do some simple components in AR and VR, but if you're doing something a little more complex, and if the expectations of your organization is to come up with something a little more complex, then that's what I would suggest. And that's what we're doing with our pilot that we're getting ready to start in VR is we're designing it. We've got all the assets. We're giving it to an agency, and they're ramping up and creating it for us. This also increases the time from concept to pilot. If we had to learn the software and learn everything, it would probably take us 2 to 3 times as long to do that. And we want to show a quick demonstration to get additional funding, because that's the other thing with a lot of these immersive learning projects. Depending on what you're doing, it could be quite expensive. So you really need to think about, whether or not you want to do it, or if you want to, in what role you'll play in that piece. If you're going to do everything in-house, you may have to bring in additional talent to help you. You may need a Unity programmer or a 3D modeler or somebody else. They may already exist in your organization, but you may not be using them in your L&D department.
Yeah. I fully believe that if somebody really wants to pick up the skills, they can go pick up the skills. There are plenty of like tutorials, Udemy, LinkedIn Learning, other things like that. But I think it's also, I think we try to do too much ourselves sometimes in this industry, where oh, I have to be the one to learn the 3D modeling. I have to be the one to do the programming and stuff. And I think it's beneficial to kind of, find, like you're saying, those resources and leverage those other developers rather than you having to be the one to do it yourself and stuff. So
Yeah, just think about some of the things that you do in your normal development. Like, I don't record voiceovers. I would much prefer giving a script to a voiceover talent and letting them give me back files that I can import into my articulate storyline file. I'm also not the world's best graphic artist, and when you're thinking about creating graphics that are specific for your organization that have to be branded correctly, or you have to be very careful about your utilization, you use outside talent. So think about that as well. Decide what it is that you want to do, what your role will be, and think about having a team of people that will be involved in the project. This is not something that you'll just do by yourself.
So that leads me to my next question, though, is let's say you do spend the time to develop this, and you're working with developers, and you get this out there. How do you measure success? That's what you created and what you put out there is actually working. What kind of data can you get from it? If you can talk to us a little bit about that.
So with the project that I'm currently working on, we're bringing in some quality engineers, and we're looking at um, also risk analysis and things like how does using this technology decrease the cost of business interruption. So when you're thinking about pulling an employee off of the manufacturing floor, or if say you're trying to teach somebody how to load boxes into an aircraft. I've worked with a company that was teaching people how to do that. You don't want to have to take an aircraft out of commission and take people on board to actually do that. So that training can be a disruption to your normal operations, and using immersive learning can really aid in that. Another example would be decreasing the cost of safety incidents. So if you can correlate this type of training to a reduction of incidents, that would be a marvelous way of showing a return on investment. If is better workforce preparation, and sometimes that doesn't come with reading a manual or attending a class and then trying to do something 6 months later. When you practice in a realistic environment and you're trying to do this, it helps develop that situational awareness, and that leads to a safer workplace and also the fewer incidents and reduction of costs.
Yeah, so there's a lot of metrics there that you can show the return on investments that you're talking about. That's great. What are some you've I know you kind of sprinkled them in throughout our conversation here, but what are some other scenarios or good use cases that somebody might want to consider that we haven't talked about yet for augmented reality, virtual reality, or mixed reality as well?
Sure. So I talked about augmented reality as performance support. We're actually using some augmented reality headsets that we can connect to Microsoft Teams, and we can allow folks to look at checklists, and they could look at a video that would walk them through the process, but they could also quickly call for help and have a video conversation with somebody who would help them through a process as well. And that integration is done directly with Microsoft Teams, which is really interesting and a neat concept. We're using the RealWear headsets to do that. Um, and another example is where you could have a 3D model that somebody could interact with. So if they're trying to do a repair and they call up a schematic that's in 3D, they can rotate it, they can zoom in, they can look at different components. Then they could use, they could click on information for a guide for disassembly and reassembly of the equipment. For virtual reality, you could that example of the aircraft, you could have employees practice stacking and wrapping pallets in a warehouse, for example. And you could have them follow safety protocols in emergencies. So the example of there's a fire in the warehouse and you have to identify the type of fire, then you have to get the right fire extinguisher, put out the fire. You can provide that in that space for them to practice that. And I've seen some really interesting uses of virtual reality where you can have more than one person that's in the simulation, where you could have somebody who's, for example, down in the manufacturing environment, and they could be looking at the fire. Then you could have somebody else who's up in a control room that has the alarms are going off and they're talking to that person. So you can simulate an actual real situation with multiple people interacting, and all the while you're capturing all that data, and it may be XAPI data that then you bring into some sort of analytic tool like Power BI to do an analysis of how long did it take them to respond, how did they look in the right place for the fire extinguisher, all sorts of data that you would not be able to capture if somebody was standing there watching somebody and they had a checklist to look at everything. In the virtual environment, we're capturing all that information, hundreds of interactions per minute, which is really really interesting. So I think that those are some real examples. Just being able to be in a safe space where you can where you don't have your real coworkers or real equipment, real emergencies where you can practice, where you can fail, and then you can be coached. You could, those situations could be recorded, and then somebody could coach you through what did you do wrong here, what did you do right, and then evaluate those situations is fascinating.
Yeah, so can you actually track like let's say like you're in a headset, can you track where the person's looking?
Oh, certainly, certainly you can. And you can, and with some devices, and I told you in the beginning that I'm like a technology junkie, and I just got these haptic devices that I'm going to experiment with. They're actually shoes that you can put on, so you can track the foot movement. If somebody moving forward, like you can track, you can have there are haptic gloves. I was at a conference and I saw somebody who was in a whole suit that was a VR suit where you could track so many different things. And all of that information is good data that can be used for business. And when you're thinking about what you're trying to do, is these all this information can be fed in, and you can look at what information are you getting, and how does that help you with the safety, with the um, with the time away from the job, and the time and labor and cost for developing these projects and the investment in technology, and how does that relate? So we'll be talking about all those things, and I'll also be talking about which I know everybody wants to make virtual reality and augmented reality, but my passion is helping you convince your organization to let you do a pilot and to do these projects. So I'm also going to be talking about what do you need to prepare for that? How do you prepare um, a proposal? How do you evaluate different vendors? What are some of the things you need to consider if you're going to do the project yourself versus using an agency? How many people need to be involved? What's the cost range of developing this technology? So those things are all going to be in our session, and I hope everybody will be able to attend. If you can't, catch me in the hall. I'll be the one with the purple hair, and I'm happy to answer your questions.
Yeah, so it sounds like your session is going to be perfect for somebody who's just wanting to explore it, or just
Correct.
say, "Hey, how do I even what is it going to even take to do this?" And so it's a great session to just get all the details there, and you're a great contact too for that kind of thing as well. Um, I did want to ask though a little bit about the devices because you've mentioned some of them, and like you mentioned, you're a technology junkie, and whenever we see each other, we're always talking about different devices as well, and what technology we're using. What are some of the when somebody's doing this? What type of devices do they have to consider? Can they just do it with their phone? Do they have to go buy like different headsets? What type of headsets? Any advice there for something that they need to consider for
Sure.
devices?
So I look at everything from an enterprise lens. So there's some people that are thinking about, well, I just want to learn about this and develop some things. But when I talk about what do you need for the business, and what are the challenges that you face for the business. So with augmented reality, you can use a smart device like a smartphone or a tablet, but early on, you need to be working with IT to make sure that you have all of the requirements in place and that you're following all of the requirements for cybersecurity for utilizing those devices, because there are a number of applications that have been developed, and there are software companies and other companies who have developed applications that work on those devices. But it's really important to make sure that you educate your IT department or you work with them on those devices. In the VR side changes every day. I mean, things that we looked at last year are different this year, and with the introduction of the Meta and other things, companies that are investing in technology, we're a global world, and there are devices that are developed globally. And with supply chain shortages, sometimes getting to those devices have been a real challenge. I've seen a slowdown in some of that because of the pandemic, but there are things that you can still utilize. Um, and I'll talk a little bit about that in my session as well. I don't want to give away too much, Jeff. I want people to come to my session.
Yeah, of course. I mean, there's still plenty more that you're going to be talking about. And Debbie, I mean, you're a great resource to talk about all things virtual reality, augmented reality as well. If you are heading out to Learning Solutions, make sure you check out Debbie's session. and that will be April 20th through the 22nd. You can find out more at learningsolutionscon.com. You can also check out some of the free resources that Debbie talked about and reports and other things like that at learningguild.com. And Debbie, do you have any way for people to get a hold of you if you want them to, or if they want to reach out to you before the conference?
Sure, they can reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'm out there. I also am out on Twitter. My handle is creative, IICRE, the number 8, IV as in Victor, EII. And you can reach me at either social media location.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Debbie. And thanks everyone for tuning in. This is it for the GuildChat Cafe episode. And make sure that you like and subscribe if you like this, and you'll be notified of all future episodes that come out. Thanks, everyone.